You join me deep in the heart of the English countryside at this incredible ruined church that's sat here for about 500 years, and it seems like the perfect place to give you a demonstration of some precision flying with a cinematic FPV drone. And I'm going to talk specifically about what this drone is at the end, so we'll get into that later, but a lot of these techniques and tricks and tips will apply to any drone or whatever setup you're using. So I hope you'll get some good value out of it, and for that reason we're going to jump straight into the stick cam and get into the demonstration. So let's do that now. Okay, a couple of quick things to point out is that there is a slight breeze today, which isn't ideal for this type of flying. And also I'm not using any hypersmooth, so there's no in-camera stabilization, and I won't use any real steady on this either. So what you're seeing is what I'm seeing. You'll get a realistic view of the HD footage, and with that in mind, let's get straight into it, because the first thing I want you to learn is your hover point. So I want you to just get enough throttle to get off the ground and then try and hover as stable as you can. Okay, so I might pick this window and try and hover level with this window, and you're going to just get a feel for the throttle that way, and that's really important. Throttle management and throttle control is essential to precision flying around proximity like this. So once you've got that in mind, the next thing, and that was quite a good example of it there, is the amount of precision you've got in your thumbs. Really, it's all about tiny little movements of your thumbs. In other words, you want to kind of not move the sticks much at all. You want to focus on being very precise and not putting many inputs into the radio at all. And the reason for that is just going to look a lot smoother. But of course, sometimes you're going to need to correct. You're going to need to make micro corrections with your thumbs, and that's fine. But just try and focus on being smooth and precise, and have a look at my thumbs on the stick cam. You'll see they're barely moving at all. The amount of correction here is really minimal indeed. So that's a good thing to consider when you're flying. But the other thing you want to think about is hitting gaps, because really when you're doing this kind of precise proximity flying, it's all about being able to hit gaps. And when I say hit gaps, I don't mean literally hit them, I mean get through them. So the most important tip I can give you for that is to see through the gap. So in this case, I'm looking not at the stone wall around the gap, I'm looking directly through it. I'm looking at the grass the other side and focusing on that and just believing that I'm going to get through that gap. In this case, I'll look at the tree through this gap and focus on that and go through. And those are fairly big gaps, but it applies even with a really small gap. Always find the very center of that gap, focus on that and see through to the other side. So in this case, I'm just looking right through to the other side, and you know, those little micro corrections that will get you through the gap, you want those to just happen subconsciously. Now the last tip is to always think one gap ahead, and when I mean that, I mean maybe one gap ahead, maybe two gaps ahead, but you want to be making predictions and thinking ahead with your proximity flying. So familiarise yourself with the spot. I'm really familiar with this spot, so I've flown it a few times before, and I know when I get through this door here that it lines up with a gap immediately to the right. So I'm already thought about going through that gap to the right. I already know that there's another gap straight after that. I know to begin turning left here, because as I do, there's going to be a doorway gap on the left here, and as I go through this doorway gap, I know that there's another one straight in front of me. I know that gap has wires across it, so I can't go through that. I'm constantly just thinking ahead so that I can keep that smooth flow going and get around the proximity. I'll take you for a little tour of this beautiful church while we wrap this video up. And I should quickly point out, because I know a few people in the comments sometimes will ask me where my respect for the dead is and that type of thing, because there are a few graves around here. But one thing I should point out is that this is an ancient church. There are no active mourners, and of course if anyone was mourning one of their loved ones, I would most certainly land and move on elsewhere. But it's an absolutely beautiful place that I have full respect for. I love it here, and the reason I like flying it is to just show off its sort of historic beauty. So yeah, I do have full respect for it. I'm also using a tiny drone which has propeller guards, and I feel like I'm at a level with my flying where I have enough expertise to know what the risks are. But I wouldn't recommend coming here if you're an absolute noob or if you're flying a really fast drone. Anyway, with that in mind, let's have a quick chat about what drone this is, because this is from HGLRC and it's the Sector 150. I'm absolutely loving this at the moment, because if you've seen any of my other videos about Cinewhoops and whether we should have ducts on Cinewhoops, whether we should have a 6S Cinewhoop or a 4S, so do we want a powerful one or not? Do we want just propeller guards or do we want ducts? And if you want to look at some of those other videos I've done, I'll put a link. But HGLRC have listened and they've made a drone which does have propeller guards, but it doesn't have those awful ducts. And it is a bit quieter. This is definitely quieter than the sort of traditional Cinewhoop. So, and the other thing is, it's tuned really nicely. So straight out of the box, it comes with everything you need. It's really nicely made, and I'm not going to do a big sales pitch about this because I did get sent this for free actually, and if you do want one, there'll be a link in the description. That does support me as a channel, and I'm not really making any money from this, so I would really appreciate that support. But this lesson today wasn't just about this drone, so whatever drone you've got, apply those techniques and hopefully you'll get some value out of it. But if I didn't like this, I wouldn't make a video about it, and I really think it's a great thing for flying really precisely. When I had one of HGLRC's other Cinewhoops called the Veyron 3, I was a big fan of it, but I did have to adapt it. I had to retune it, and I had to take the ducts off. In fact, that's why I had to retune it, because I removed the ducts and I found that I was able to fly it a bit more precisely and with better flight characteristics without those ducts. I actually flew the Veyron 3 through a blossom tree, right through the middle of it, and some of that footage, and even some footage from this spot, got featured in a music video by The Damned. So I'll put a link to that as well if you're interested. But yeah, the footage came out really nicely. And what they've essentially done with this Sector 150 is made that drone out of the box, so you haven't got to do any of the adapting. It just comes ready to go. This one's a 4S. I'm flying on analog, but I think you can get a 6S version if flight time's really important to you, and you can get a digital version as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.